Hi, I want to begin this post, excuse me, I want to begin this post by reading a poem that a dear friend of mine read at a men's weekend about a week ago. And the poem's called A Brief for the Defense, and it's by Jack Gilbert. It goes like this. Sorrow everywhere, slaughter everywhere. If babies are not starving someplace, they are starving somewhere else, with flies in their nostrils. But we enjoy our lives because that's what God wants. Otherwise, the mornings before summer dawn would not be made so fine. The Bengal tiger would not be fashioned so miraculously well. The poor women at the fountain are laughing together between the suffering they have known and the awfulness of their future, smiling and laughing while somebody in the village is very sick. There is laughter every day in the terrible streets of Calcutta, and the women laugh in the cages of Bombay. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of the world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. If the locomotive of the Lord runs us down, we should give thanks that the end had such magnitude. We must admit, there will be music despite everything. We stand at the prow again of a small ship anchored late at night in the tiny port looking over to the sleeping island. The waterfront is 3 shuttered cafes and 1 naked light burning. To hear the faint sound of oars in the silence as a rowboat comes slowly out and then goes back is truly worth all the years of sorrow that are to come. Beautiful poem. And it reminds me of something else. A brilliant young man who's also part of that men's group said, I've realized my purpose here. My purpose is simply to love life. Yes, to love life exactly the way it is. And I want to now speak a little bit about the way it is, the way it really is, who we are and our history. In preparation for this post, I've been rereading Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, about our early humans' life on the planet. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it to everyone. But, in that book, he explores the transformation of our species, Homo sapiens, from an ordinary mammal somewhere in the middle of the food chain into a dominant life form that split the atom, walked on the moon, and changed the face of the planet. How did that happen? In his recount, it turns out that animals, much like today's human, first appeared about 2.5 million years ago. And at that time, there was nothing special about them. They looked a little different, they didn't have fur, and they walked on 2 legs. But in every other aspect, they engaged in the same kind of behaviors, gathering food, raising the young, competing for status in their group, whatever it was, as virtually all other animals of their time. Biologists use the word species to group together animals who are drawn to mate with one another and then can produce fertile offsprings. Species that are evolved from a common ancestor are grouped together in a larger category called a genus, and that exists within an even larger grouping of animals that are derived from some ancient matriarch or patriarch. And this larger grouping is called a family. Our species, sapien, is part of the genus Homo within the family of great apes. Our closest living relatives on Earth now are the chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. And at some point, about 6 million years ago, a female ape had two daughters, one of whom became the ancestor for all chimpanzees, and the other the ancestor or grandmother for all humans. It's difficult to admit, but our relatives really were not very nice, or still aren't. A male chimpanzee who wanders out of his territory into the territory of another chimpanzee band will be set upon by the local males and torn limb from limb. Many people, not wanting to admit that this is the heritage of us, have conjectured that we might instead be evolved from bonobos, who were reputed to be more peaceful and loving. But unfortunately, for them anyway, recent research has revealed that bonobos are actually 3 times as aggressive as chimpanzees. Their aggression differs in that it's expressed within their group rather than to outsiders. And whenever a human is around, bonobos become very docile, and that may account for their reputation as being peaceful. Humans from the generation Homo first showed up in East Africa about 2.5 million years ago. They were descended from a genus of apes called Australopithecus. And evidence shows that about 2 million years ago, some humans left East Africa and traveled and settled in Europe, Asia, and other parts of Africa. And once there, separated, they evolved into distinct and separate species. The Neanderthals in Europe evolved to meet the cold climates. Homo erectus evolved in East Asia, and various other species of humans evolved in other parts of the world when they had to meet the particular climate and challenges and difficulties of their environment. So for close to 2 million years, all of these species kind of evolved separately. And for whatever reason, it wasn't until about 70,000 years ago that Homo sapiens moved out of Africa and started to meet and interact with other human species around the world. And those species had different characteristics. And while the how or the why might remain open to speculation, there is one thing that just is absolutely clear, and that's whenever and wherever Homo sapiens arrived in new locations, the native human populations soon became extinct. And the very last one, which was on the island of Flores in Indonesia, disappeared about 12,000 years ago. It wasn't until about 14,000 BC that members of Homo sapiens who lived in Siberia made it across the Bering Strait and entered the landmass of the Americas. Once arriving there, in what's now Alaska, they started to migrate south. And over the next couple of millennia, global warming was starting to melt the great glaciers from the last ice age. And that allowed the passage south to be easier and faster. And by 10,000 BC, Homo sapiens had reached Tierra del Fuego, the furthest point south in Argentina. Before the arrival of sapiens, the Americans were home to a stunning variety of large and grand megafauna. There were mammoths, there were mastodons, there were saber-toothed cats, there were horses, camels, There were sloths that weighed 16,000 pounds. But within 2,000 years of sapiens' arrival, the vast majority of all of these large mammals went extinct. In the Americas, as well as in Europe, Asia, Australia, and eventually the more remote islands, the arrival of sapiens, us, marked one of the biggest and fastest ecological disasters to ever hit the animal kingdom. And this first wave of extinctions was soon followed by another and another, associated with the agricultural and then the industrial revolutions. I'm bringing all of this up just to illustrate and get to a couple points, which I'm going to elaborate on in the future. First, I just want to get clear on when we humans use the word we, I want to be clear about who and what that we refers to. We refers to a species whose ancestors had the habit of violently tearing apart others of their species that were not part of their particular band or group. We descended from the chimpanzees. Also, we, Homo sapiens, have driven to extinction every other human species that has inherited the planet. Maybe this was the first ethnic cleansing, which predated any idea of religion or ethnicity. And thirdly, Homo sapiens, us, initiated ecological disasters on every new place they arrived throughout recorded history, long before they differentiated into various cultural groups of indigenous peoples. So ultimately, what I would like and what I hope for is for us to be able to see reality, to look in the mirror and not avoid or deny any of that, while at the same time seeing the gold and the beauty as well. I would like us to develop a reality-based mythology in politics, to not pretend that the problem is capitalism or colonialism or sexism or racism or Islamophobia or some other mind virus or abstract category that infects those other people and not us. I would like us to see all of that is us. And ultimately, I want us to become adults. My hope is that we can own and take responsibility for that shadow that rides with us. And starting there, that we could focus on what I think is truly important. And that is developing the practices, the myths, and the ways of thinking, or committing to the paths and the teachings most likely to bring out the gold and what's best in us, rather than all of those practices that will cause us to submit to that tempting dark shadow. And I believe this path is worth taking. And this, for me, is my beginning of a brief for the defense. Aho.